Hello and welcome to our Collaborate, Innovate, and Accelerate webinar series, which we're running throughout the year. My name is Joel Gress with Dynamic Tech Services. Presenting today is Russ Graff from Netstock. And before we get started, I just want to let everybody know that all attendees will be joining in listen-only mode. Please submit your questions via the question window, and we'll do our best to get to them when we're at the Q&A session towards the back end of the presentation today. If you have any follow-up questions after the webinar, please contact me directly at joel.gress@dynamictsi.com. Okay. Today's webinar is the hidden cost of inventory spreadsheets. To view our other events or register for those events, please go out to dynamictechservices.com/events. A special thanks to Progressive Technology, one of our infrastructure partners, for helping with the promotion of this webinar today in their monthly newsletter, The Red Wire. So welcome to any Progressive Technology customers, and thank you for joining us. Progressive Technology is an IT managed services company based in South Carolina that's dedicated to ensuring your IT assets are bringing value to employee productivity, customer service, and ultimately the bottom line. You can find more about Progressive Technology at progressivetechnology.net. The solution being presented today is Netstock, which is compatible with both Acumatica ERP and Dynamics SL, as well as many other ERP solutions. The Acumatica integration is a direct integration, and the Dynamics SL is a flat file integration. The agenda for our meeting is pretty straightforward. Russ is going to take us through some pain points and problems, best practices and solutions, and then from there we'll move into a Q&A. With that, Russ, I'll turn it over to you.
All right, thank you, Joel. I appreciate that. And thanks to all of our attendees today as well, or those that may be listening to the recording of this. As mentioned, our topic is to cover the hidden costs of inventory spreadsheets. And so we've got a lot to cover the next 30 or 40 minutes or so, including a demo of the Netstock application. But before we get to that, let me preface that with some commentary here. So let's go ahead and get started. So at Netstock, we actually work with small, medium-sized businesses all around the country and around the globe for that matter. And of course, these are inventory-based businesses, so distributors, manufacturers, retailers, and increasingly e-tailers, right, e-commerce specific organizations. And so for most of those, the value of the inventory is their largest asset on the balance sheet. Maybe they've got some real estate that competes with that, but obviously, even if it's not the largest asset, it is core to the business. It's what their business is all about. And so managing it well is critical to your profitability. And I'm sure those that are listening to this presentation today, that's why you're here, right? Inventory is critical and core and really needs to be managed well. And how do the majority of those businesses manage this is the question. And certainly most firms have accounting software in place or an ERP application like Dynamics SL or Acumatica. And oftentimes we see third-party applications added to the mix. Sometimes in the case of inventory, for barcoding purposes, maybe an expense application or other things that are added onto the core accounting ERP application. And in addition to that, we often see the use of spreadsheets in the mix as well, whether financial reporting or other areas. And so we do also see Excel spreadsheets and Google Sheets and so forth being used in the area of inventory as well, which is going to be a key point of our discussion today. But before we dig into that topic in depth, I just want to give this a little bit of context. When we talk about inventory management, I like to think of it in two different components: inventory control and inventory replenishment. And there's a difference between those two. And I found that a lot of times when we say the phrase inventory management, what we first think of is really what I would call inventory control. It's more the physical management of the product itself that's in our warehouses, shipping and receiving, picking and packing in the warehouse, doing counts. Hopefully you're doing some cycle counts as well as your regular physical counts of the entire inventory. And then oftentimes using tools like barcoding and handheld devices and barcode labels and so forth to help capture those transactions and all that activity that's going on in the warehouse. So really an important critical part of the process, clearly. You have to know what product you have and where it is and in what quantities. Otherwise, you're kind of stuck right there. And ERP applications do an excellent job of this, right, of capturing all those transactions, but it's not the whole story. So a lot of times that's where our mind goes when we say inventory management. We don't think about the flip side of the coin, which is, do we have the right product in the right place at the right time, which I would call the replenishment perspective, right? Sometimes it's referred to as inventory optimization. And so the goal of this component is to really get a handle on future demand, right? What do I need to buy? When do I need to buy it? Where do I prioritize my spend? And it takes a different set of tools and understanding and analytics to help us get to that point. And this is the function where we often see Excel being used to try to accomplish this piece of the inventory management effort. And that's what we're going to talk about, where there are some challenges. And let's understand, what those issues are, what the impact is on firms like yours when inventory is not optimized. Excuse me. It results in a couple of key issues and challenges in the business. One is running out of stock. Secondly, accumulating too much of other stock. And then a lot of wasted time and effort and productivity challenges for the folks that are responsible for managing these two really competing interests, right? Having enough but not too much. And so the buyers and planners are really stuck in the middle of this challenging environment. But no question, the worst thing that can happen is running out of product when a customer has a need. Not only do you risk losing that sale if the customer goes elsewhere to find what he or she needs, but if that person has a positive experience with your competitor, you may also lose that customer altogether. So it's a very difficult proposition. In today's Amazon-driven world of expectations, right, it's really hard to recover from that. And I think we've all can attest to the fact that customer loyalty is not what it once was. Our customers tend to have less patience with us these days if we can't fulfill their orders. So unfortunately, the way that most firms solve that problem is by simply buying too much to prevent them from running out. And they don't really understand what the downside of that is. And to me, the biggest problem is all the working capital and cash that's now tied up in inventory when you approach it that way. And there's just cash sitting on the warehouse shelves. And that's serious money that can be used elsewhere in the firm to fund other profit creating initiatives, make other investments and so forth. And who on this call doesn't struggle with managing cash flow in their business? It's really a challenge for every business, but especially small, medium-sized firms. We really need to have a handle on that. And so to have that stash of cash sitting there on the warehouse gathering dust, really not doing anything for you is very challenging and difficult. But the other problem is even maybe a little more tangible, and that is that there are actual hard costs associated with having that excess inventory. These are called carrying costs, include things like taxes and insurance or shrinkage that occurs from breakage or obsolescence. And obviously it's taking up space in the warehouse, and there's labor costs associated with counting it and moving it around and all those kinds of things. So it really has some very specific costs. Most experts will peg a cost at about 20% of the value is a carrying cost. So that's really significant. If we do just some quick back of the envelope math on that, for example, and we often find 20 or 30% excess is very common in most businesses that we do take on. But just for easy math and to be conservative here, let's just use a 10% figure. Let's say that 10% of the inventory in a given company is in an excess status. And again, for easy math, let's use $1 million worth of inventory on the books as an example. So in that case, very conservatively, you've got $100,000 in excess inventory, right? 10% of the million. And I don't mean buffer stock or safety stock that needs to be part of the picture as well. This is true excess inventory, and that's, again, very conservative. So now there's $100,000 in cash doing nothing for you. But on top of that, if we use the 20% of carrying cost model, that's $20,000 worth of hard costs out the door every year. That's $1,700 a month roughly, needlessly, every month, every year. And this, again, very conservative numbers, right? This is more than likely it's twice these numbers or more. So you might want to be thinking about what your number is, right? Or do you guess that you're at 15% in excess, 20% more? We have that conversation a lot, and it's amazing how often people recognize that, yeah, I probably got 10, 20, 30% too much inventory. And so you need to kind of do your own calculations there. But a third impact, again, is this impact on the buyers and planners in the organization that find themselves, again, in the middle of this challenge, running around putting out fires, expediting orders, maybe spending a lot of money on extra shipping to get those expedited orders, using all kinds of manual processes and running through the warehouse and making phone calls and getting yelled at. It's a very stressful situation, to be honest. And as a result, they also don't have time to do proactively what they would prefer to be doing in managing the supply chain, right? Working with your vendors, building those relationships, negotiating better pricing or shipping costs or terms of payment and all those kinds of things, going to visit vendors and all those kinds of things that they should be and could be doing if they had the time and the energy. So, so it's a real challenge. And the real problem for firms is the lack of good analytics, a lack of insight into what's going on in the inventory. We sometimes refer to it as the health of the inventory within an organization. And we saw a study recently that we highlight here that only about a third or so of supply chain executives that were surveyed said that they had tools and processes that give them real insight into that health of their inventory. And that's, really surprising actually to us and sad. And as we just discussed, pretty expensive as well. So it's a problem that needs to be solved. So, what about all those accounting and ERP software applications that are in use by these businesses, right? Can't Dynamics SL and Acumatica solve this for us? And that's the right first question, actually. But it turns out that most accounting packages, especially those that are built for the small, medium-sized market, really don't do a great job of this. They're usually missing some piece of functionality, or what's there is kind of hard to use or understand, and so it's underutilized as a result. I would say in reality, to me, Acumatica probably does a better job of this than any other ERP I have seen. And if you've had a chance to read the bio, I've been in this game for over 30 years and been involved in lots of ERP implementations over that career. And I'm very impressed by what Acumatica brings to the table in its native functionality. It's pretty good. But even still often comes up short of what some firms need, and maybe I would even say most firms need in this area. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. So for a lot of firms, that leaves Excel to fill the gap, and for some seemingly pretty good reasons, right? It's generally available to everybody in the company, pretty easy to use, at least at a basic level. There's some familiarity there, the whole Windows and Office environment, that's very common interface, so it's pretty easy to navigate. And we know it can manage some pretty complex calculations. We've all seen Excel wizards in our organizations or in others that can create some pretty amazing worksheets, no doubt about it. Excel is an outstanding application and a great tool that has really been useful for business over the years. And it's generally on everybody's desktop, it's on their computers, so cost-free, right? Well, is it really? That's the question that we would beg, right? You may not pay much for it, but there are hidden costs that are real and could be really substantial. You could actually think of it as a development tool or a platform, right? Here's this blank sheet or this blank form, and now you get to do what you want with it, but now you've got to build those functions. And we would argue that spreadsheets are really not well suited for the challenges of inventory management. It does an outstanding job for some budgeting functions and all kinds of other reports and tools. There's no question Excel has its place in the organization for sure, but we would argue probably not in the area of inventory management. And we'll talk about some of those reasons why. And it's really because it's all about data, right? Better inventory management requires good data, accurate data, and there's lots of different parts and pieces to that. If you think about how an ERP system is structured with all the data files that have all this other information, whether it's existing current transactions, historical transactions, master file tables, and so forth, there's a lot there. And so for you to be able to analyze all that in a spreadsheet for proper demand planning and so forth, you've really got to extract and grab a ton of data from all these different places. And ERP systems do a great job of capturing all that, right? Our team spend all day entering orders and invoices and all kinds of transactions, and all that data is nicely stored and organized in all these tables. But now you've got to grab that, extract that data into Excel, and know how to get at it, how data file structures, what their naming conventions are, and all that. Not easy, certainly doable, and some of you have probably been doing that. And of course, the reality is the data is now typically in 7, 8, 10, maybe more files or tables within that database. And of course, whenever you upgrade versions of either the accounting side or the Excel side, you may have to review for any changes in structure or file naming conventions and keep that adjustment updated and so forth. So it's a little bit time consuming to do all that, but it's doable. You can actually get at all that data and dump it out with some capability, right? Some effectiveness. But a big challenge with that is really what I would call synchronization problems, right? How is or the timing of that data extraction. If you're dumping stock balances at 9 this morning, and then and that takes a little bit of time, and then you get a phone call, go grab a cup of coffee, called into a sudden meeting, and then you come back to your desk and you bring down the open purchase orders at 10 o'clock, and then some other tables later. Do you really have accurate data? Probably not. Those tables, those files are no longer in sync because we've got data activity happening all the time, even maybe 24/7. If I've got a web store and people are placing orders online at night and it's automatically syncing to my database, right? I've got activity going on constantly. And so the odds of us getting a clean capture that's in sync at a point in time is really low. So that's a real challenge. And we know that even small differences in that data synchronization can result in bad formulas cascading down. I might not get an error message in my spreadsheet, but I'm going to get bad information and calculations downstream. And besides the accuracy issue, there's also a control issue, and this is a big one for me. We think about who's really in charge. Is it one person that has the responsibility of managing the spreadsheet, maintaining it, making changes, updating, doing that data extraction and making sure that everything came in correctly, that there was no errors and so forth? Are there other people in the organization now that have the ability to go in and edit that, or do they really even understand the inputs and the outputs there, or the formulas that are embedded in the app? And what happens if that one person is out sick or on vacation, or worse, leaves the company? And we hear these stories all the time from our customers that they thought they were doing it okay with the spreadsheet that they had. Of course, there wasn't a lot of visibility because that one person said, "Don't worry, it's all good." But then that person went away, and now nobody else knows how to get into that application and make changes and really understand what's happening. So there's a real risk here, I think, a factor that needs to be concerned with by executives in the organization. And then there's just all kinds of other additional planning inputs, right, that may or may not be accurate or even available within the ERP or accounting environment. We all, when we first set up our systems, put in lead times for our vendors, right? And how often do we actually change those and update those? So how accurate is that lead time? It tends to be a pretty static field, and within months or certainly years, it's way out of whack. But yet we're going to rely on that data extract of lead time to help us understand what to buy and when to buy it. It's a challenge. Other things like, how do I classify my products, and how do I calculate a reasonable safety stock or that buffer for managing risk in the supply chain? What about my replenishment cycles, and if I change those? And your firm may have your own unique circumstances, right, due to your products that you sell or the customers or suppliers that you have. There are some unique marketplaces out there. So you have some other potential complications. Maybe you've got a central distribution environment and a kind of a hub and spoke, and some warehouses are replenished or supplied by a central distribution center. How do I build that into my spreadsheet environment? What about an environment where there's lots of new SKUs being created, new parts being created all the time? How do I know how to forecast for those? Will it look like prior items that I could utilize for their forecast? What about if I'm doing some kitting or assembly and I have a bill of materials, right, that has component levels, especially if it's multiple levels of sub components and so forth? So there's a lot of complexity, and even if you thought you could cover all that, the reality is tomorrow it probably changes, if not before tomorrow, right? There's constant change. It's a moving target. And so it's just asking an awful lot of our team and of our tools to try to be able to stay on top of all those complexities and all those things that can really get in the way. So I think we understand that we've got a challenge here, right? The problems are really stacking up. We've made our point, and using Excel to drive your replenishment and to create what we would call an optimal purchase order really is a futile effort, especially with any consistency over time. Again, you may get to a snapshot in time where it's pretty decent, but then things change and now you've got problems again. So you really need this concept of an optimal purchase order. You really need to be able to purchase the exact right amount of product at the exact right time every time. right? Not just some of the time, because if you only do it some of the time, you're still going to have some of those impacts that we talked about of stocking out and overstocking. And so if I can do an optimal purchase order, right, order at the right time, at the right product levels and so forth every time, I'm going to end up with what we would call an optimized warehouse or an optimized inventory across all warehouses, right? You may have either multiple physical locations or even what we would call virtual locations or warehouses within one physical structure. And so that's really that's the nirvana. That's what you're trying to get to is achieving that optimized environment. And what that really means, kind of the textbook message here is on the screen, right? It's having the lowest possible inventory value with the highest possible service to your customers. If you can achieve that balance, and it's never going to be perfect, right? Don't have the misconception that you'll ever get this to perfection, because you won't. There's just too much of a moving target, too many challenges. But you can optimize, you can get close, you can do the best possible job of getting the lowest possible inventory with the highest possible service to your customers. But to do that, to achieve that, you've really got to have a process and that gives you that insight, right? You've got to really understand what gives you that control and that visibility into your inventory. And to do that, there are some best practices, some key things that you really need to be able to achieve to get to that point of optimization. And one is an item classification. You're probably very familiar already with an ABC ranking of your items in terms of value, but we would argue that you also need to have a ranking of your items in terms of speed of movement or velocity, and like a high, medium, low movement, and look at those two in a combined classification environment. And now I have the ability to build policies and procedures around those different items within your inventory instead of painting them all with a broad brush and treating them all the same, because they're not, right? And they have different levels of impact on your profits. Safety stock levels, we talked a little bit about that, how Acumatica provides some of that right out of the box. But there's a level of sophistication that you could take that to that really takes into consideration some of the other risks in the organization, like the volatility of my forecast or the ability of my supplier to perform as expected in terms of their lead times, and are they shipping in full or only partial shipments and so forth. And just getting ahead of the curve in terms of some alerts and knowing what is about to happen that I could still take some action on, right? I think I'm about to run out or I'm about to have too much inventory. So getting some alerts and awareness of that and kind of getting evidence of that quickly, so that, and one of the themes of this series that Dynamics Tech is doing has the word accelerate, right? So you want to be able to accelerate your decision making here, not find out too late that something occurred, but get ahead of the curve and get out ahead of it and take some action to prevent that problem from happening. And certainly one of the things is forecasts that are based on real data, not based on the optimism of your sales team or just by looking at the last couple of weeks of sales or what's in a demand for a future sales order. There's a lot of different parts and pieces that really go into a proper calculation of a data-based forecast. And so that's a really critical piece. And so to achieve all that, you really need the right tool. And we've already talked about the wrong tool, Excel or Google Sheets or some other spreadsheet environment. It's going to get in your way of creating those optimal orders, and it really makes it just about impossible. Whereas the right tool will again employ these best practices to help you establish policies and procedures around those that then results in maximizing your profit from your inventory, really optimizing that result, which again, if we think about what the impacts of not doing it well are, if we do it well, that means the result is less excess, fewer stockouts, and improved productivity and less stress for those buyers and planners, where they can now be doing the things proactively that they need to be doing. So what does that right tool look like? Again, easy access to the metrics, right? That analytics that we talked about in that survey that's lacking for many businesses. You've got to have easy access to that. You've got to have insights and visibility into all your items, but then also have the ability to prioritize those, right? To manage by exception. So if I've got 1,000 SKUs or 10,000 SKUs, we've got some customers that have 1,000,000 SKUs and others that only have 100 SKUs. But you've got to be able to manage by exception and rank those and prioritize which ones are having the biggest potential impact on my profit and on my customer service levels, and then focus my energies there and work my way down the list with proper priorities. And it really, to us, that requires a dashboard to really give you that visibility and put you into control. And when you find the right tool, you'll know it, right? Because you'll have all the results that we just talked about, all those best practices available to you, and that's great. You'll know when you have it. But I would argue also that even with the right tool, it's not necessarily going to solve the problem for you if a couple of other conditions aren't met, right? If the implementation of it is too difficult, right? Maybe it has all this sophistication and capability, but if it's really hard to implement or really hard to understand and use, then it's still not going to work for you. I would say it's still not really, quote, the right tool, right? Or if it's too expensive, right? It still has to have an ROI, like any investment in your business. You've got to be able to do something that's affordable and that makes sense financially, so that there's a return on that investment. There's no sense spending $1 million if it's going to save you 100,000, right? Just like any other investment you'd make in the business, you have to make that analysis. So it's got to be priced right. And I would argue that change management is a real challenge as well. All right, if the team doesn't agree to use it, if there's not executive sponsorship from the top down that says, look, this is the better way for us to do business. This is why we're doing it. It's going to show these results, and we're going to do this, right? Then sometimes it falls apart. And I know change is hard. Many of you listening to this conversation have probably invested a lot of your own time and effort into your current processes and whatever tools you're using, including maybe those spreadsheets. And there's a lot of pride of ownership in that. A lot of blood, sweat, and tears went into creating it. I get it. But if you can understand that there is now a better way that served its purpose, now it's time to take the next step up and take this to the next level, then I think you can have success. But I understand that change management is hard, and I think that's a great use of Joel and his team at Dynamic Tech, is to help work through that process and make sure that the executive teams are checking on the progress and are looking at some of the analytics and seeing the trends going the right direction and understanding that the investment was worth it, and we're going to continue down that path and so forth. So there's a lot to that, and I think again, your business partner and Dynamic Tech can really help you with a lot of that. So back to this concept, a couple other thoughts, and we'll fire up the software here in just a minute. But again, the replenishment tool within Acumatica is pretty solid. It's really one of the best I've seen for any ERP, and it's already better than doing a spreadsheet, right? So even if you did nothing else out of this, but started with Acumatica and made full use of their replenishment functionality, that would be progress for you. It does a decent job of some basic min-max levels and some safety stock calculations that are in there. It's got some basic seasonality, so it can look at some of these trends over time to help you project future demand. And it's got some automated tools there for reordering. So it's really pretty solid. But if your business has more complexities than those basic methods can manage, right? If you've got things that require more sophistication in your organization, then you can leverage that ERP data to create better forecasts and better classification and so forth by using a tool like NetStock on top of the Acumatica functionality that's already there. And I think that makes a lot of sense for many of you. And if you're on SL today, for example, you probably have more limited capability in this area, and the addition of NetStock to that environment would be a great step from a couple of perspectives. One, helps you solve this particular problem, but it also gets you into the cloud environment, right? Kind of a hybrid approach, a first step into experiencing a cloud application. We can grab all that raw data out of SL, just like we do in Acumatica, transform it into actionable information on the dashboard. Because it's cloud-based, it's accessible anytime, anywhere, on any device, any browser. So it's a great use of cloud technology. And as a bonus, should you later move to Acumatica, all that data that we've captured in our cloud application is already available. Essentially, all that historical and transaction data is converted, in quotes, for you at no additional cost, right? You implement Acumatica as a next phase in your ERP environment, and we just change our pointers to pull data instead of from SL over to Acumatica, and you go forward with all that historical information and all that ability to do proper demand planning and forecasting with it and so forth. So it really could be the best of both worlds and a nice transition process for you in the SL environment. So what's the NetStock approach, right? So our team came together about 8 or 9 years ago and built the NetStock application, cloud-based inventory replenishment. that delivers on all these best practices. The team that built it, the four founders of Netstock, all had decades of experience in big global organizations with very complicated, customized supply chains, writing our own forecasting algorithms and all that kind of stuff. And so we just a huge level of domain experience and knowledge in this space. But they realized that the middle market firms, 8, 9, 10 years ago, by that point already had just as much complexity in their demand, supply chain environment, so forth, as the big guys have always had, but didn't have the proper tools, didn't have the wherewithal and the budgets to solve the problem the way that the big guys had always done. So they saw an opportunity to leverage the cloud and the internet as a delivery mechanism and scale down some of that functionality of all their experience and put together an application that really made sense for small and mid-sized firms. And that's what we're about to take a look at. I would say that the theory, the hypothesis has been proven, because in that 8 or 9 years now that we've been in business, we're approaching close to 1,400 companies around the globe, nearly 800 alone in North America, that are using this exact application every day. Everyone's on the exact same version, same look and feel every single day around the world, and they're all driving more profit from their inventory as a result. So what you'll see here is it's a cloud-based on-demand, again, seamless integration. So we solve all that data accuracy and synchronization issue that I referenced earlier. That's taken care of, right? It's off the table. We take care of that for you. And then you'll see a dashboard-driven and graphical, colorful, interactive environment that really utilizes this best practices model and manages by exception. And because of the cloud environment, the model is very rapidly deployed and very affordable subscription type pricing, no long-term contracts and commitments and so forth. So with that, let's go ahead and take a look at the application, and hopefully my dashboard has stayed alive here while I've been talking, and it looks like it has. So this is what you'll see, and I'll expand that just a little bit, make that a little bit easier for you, hopefully. If you log in as a user, you'll be presented with this dashboard, and it has 9 different widgets or KPIs on the dashboard. The bottom 3 are less important from a day-to-day standpoint. There's some analysis of new SKUs, which I referenced earlier. So we want to segregate those and highlight those because we know those are more challenging to forecast, and you got to pay a little bit more attention there. Some other analysis and breakdown. And one of the things we do is we actually analyze the quality of the data that we're extracting from the ERP and looking for flaws, right? We're testing some 50 plus different data elements and scoring those and helping you identify where maybe you need to do some cleanup in the data. So you can be doing that concurrently while still getting great analytics out of this application. But the top 6 widgets or KPIs here are really where the rubber meets the road. And you'll see a common format here for each one of these widgets, right? I've got a bar chart that shows me over time how this particular KPI is trending. I've got an understanding of the full nature of the report, right? Where do I stand in total? And then I've got what we call our top 5 list, the top 5 items in my inventory or in a particular warehouse, depending on my view, that is contributing the most to that particular condition. So right there, color-coded snapshot view, very consistent, easy to navigate, easy to understand, with a lot of what we call hover over capability, right? As I hover over this number, I see a pop-up bubble that says I can click on that and get the full report. So for example, over time, looking at my dashboard as a national or an aggregated view of all my warehouses, I can see what my total stock holding is versus my perfect ideal model, which again, we'll never get to perfection, but this is our target. And I can see that I've got a lot of excess inventory, but it's trending down nicely. When I started 12 periods ago, which is in this case months, right? It can be months, days, or weeks. Over the last 12 months, this inventory level has gone down some $20 million, which is great progress, and I can just quickly see that visually, but I obviously still have more work to do. But the good news is at the same time, while I've got too much, at least I'm overshooting my target in terms of fill rate to my customers. I'm achieving over 98% fill rate on my orders that are coming in, which is the good news of having all that inventory. Now, the goal is to continue to hit that target while continuing to reduce. And so I highlight then specifically, what do I have in excess stock and where am I currently stocked out and potentially losing sales, as I referenced, to those customers. And what's that number value and how many items make that up? And then again, here's my top 5 list. So if I wanted to look at all 416 items that are making up this excess stock, I can quickly just click once, drill into this full view, And there's a listing of every single item, some 20, 25 on a page and as many pages as it takes. And I can dump this down to a CSV download and maybe put that into Excel for some further analysis. That's a great use of the tool. The default sort is by value, but I can sort by any of these column headers, just like in an Excel spreadsheet. But I can also filter this data very quickly right here within the application. So since I'm looking at excess stock, maybe I just want to see all the items that are maybe the slower moving items. So I look at my low velocity items because I know those will be the toughest ones to get rid of through normal attrition. And now I've got 229 of those. And now maybe I sort by supplier. And now maybe I dump that down to my CSV report and send that off to my suppliers in kind and say, hey, look, I'm sitting on this much stuff. Is there any way I can give it back to you? Or do you have another customer that I can send it to and help me get rid of this, right? Depending on your relationship with your vendor and so forth. Now you can take some action because you've been able to slice and dice and look at and analyze all this data in every way from Sunday, right? All kinds of different combinations and ways that I can filter that data. If I go back to the dashboard, again, the concept of this top 5 is really useful. And you'll notice some color coding here, and I just referenced this concept of a velocity. If I look at a specific location, I'm just going to pick a central store, and you may notice that we are multi-currency capable. If you've got global operations, we automatically do the currency conversions for you. This is where I do that product classification that I referenced, right? So here's my ABC analysis of all my items, ranking by value. But then here is that velocity ranking in high, medium, low. And then here is a combined view of those different axes. And I can now look at those in a couple of different ways and see graphically and very pictorially, what's the status of my inventory? What's the nature of the items in my inventory? And now I can build some policies around that accordingly. So for example, these guys up here in upper right corner in green, these are my fastest moving, highest value items. These are my bread and butter items that are contributing the most to my profitability. I want to pay special attention to those and build some policies, maybe higher target fill rates and so forth. As opposed to the item in lower left here in the red, I might question why I even bother to stock these things, right? If I've got a supplier that's down the road from me that can manage this inventory for me with short lead times, I might just decide not to even stock these items any longer. Or if these are items that are critical for a manufacturing process, some nuts and bolts or washers or whatever it might be, that I can buy in bulk at low cost, buy them twice a year and put them in the corner of the warehouse, right? So now I can make legitimate policy decisions regarding my inventory based on how we classify those items, and those parameters can all be configured and worked with you as we go through the deployment. But it comes out of the box with some standard approaches that are, again, best practices, and you're off and running very quickly. And now when I look at my dashboard and I see these items that are in excess, these are all green colored items on the top. So these are bread and butter items. Maybe I'm just going to let normal attrition manage those for me. But I may also be looking at items where I'm stocking out or about to stock out, and I see one in green. Okay, that's the first one I want to worry about. So now I go drill into that specific item, and I have all the information at my fingertips, again, as a buyer or planner, right here for me, one click, and I can see everything I need to know about this item. Static information that's coming from the master file. How did we look at the demand profile for this? What's the historic demand and what's our algorithm being used? I may not have mentioned that the NetStock application has 15 different sophisticated algorithms available to it. It will automatically choose the best fitting algorithm to match this historical pattern and then project future demand as a result of that. And then we have this calculation of safety stock, which I think is really one of our pieces of secret sauce, if you will, looking at the target fill rate and how often I replenish that item and what my real lead time is for this item for this vendor. I now can apply some risk factors. How volatile is the forecast? How dependable is my supplier? And how that might impact my safety stock or buffer stock to manage those risks. And now I take that safety stock and flow that into what we call our policy panel. And in terms of time and units of measure, I'm calculating a lead time plus a safety stock gives me my reorder point or my min, plus my replenishment cycle gives me my max. And now I've got my every day for every item in every warehouse, a freshly calculated safety stock, min and max, and then looking at my existing status, what's on hand and what's allocated and so forth, and what's already on order, my net stock position, and a recommendation on what I need to do now to solve this problem for me. So right here at my fingertips. Again, color coding, easy to understand, easy terminology. I can see exactly what's going on with this item. And gosh, is there a purchase order already out there? There is not. I better go ahead and place an order. Maybe somebody yesterday placed an order and took the last of my stock unexpectedly, right? My demand exceeded my expectations. So now I'm in a stock out situation. I can react quickly next day and place that order, right? And see what's going on. And it will automatically be adjusting that forecast and those purchase recommendations because of all that activity every day when I capture this data out of the ERP. One of the things that I can do with that forecasting environment is make amendments to it. So our algorithms are going to do a great job, all the sophisticated math that you could want to help calculate a future projected demand. But there's certainly also going to be some tribal knowledge or external forces that you as a buyer or planner will bring to bear on this forecast as well. You're going to get feedback from your sales teams. You may have just signed a new deal with Costco, and they're going to have to build up stock in 10 stores in region, Northwest region or something along those lines. You can now go ahead and amend the forecast that the algorithms have used to project future demand and make those changes, right? And I can adjust those, test those, see what those are. I can do it for a range of months for a percentage across. Maybe I like the basic profile, but I just need to bump everything by 10% for a 90-day period. Whatever that might be, I've got all that ability to manipulate those, see that graphically exactly as I make those changes, and then apply that new forecast immediately, which now may change my purchase recommendations depending on what my lead times were and what my status was of some other factors. So just that quickly, I can take that computer generated forecast, make my changes based on my information and external knowledge, and now see the resulting buying, purchasing plan and so forth. Without going into too much detail here in the time that we've got, again, we're tracking great supplier performance information and measuring lead times performance with some really sophisticated math. We're understanding the bill of materials environment. It happens to be that the item that I picked off the dashboard is a finished good that has multiple items in a bill of material, and we understand what those ratios are based on the data that we pull from Acumatica or SL. And we understand this down to 99 levels, by the way. So if I've got sub-assemblies that roll up to other sub-assemblies to a finished good, I'll know exactly what that component demand is and blow that through based on my finished good demand and have a perfect picture of where I need to, be buying those raw materials and components to keep a production process going. We do understand this concept of a central warehouse or central distribution environment. So one of my demand streams may be a secondary warehouse as opposed to a manufacturing process. All that is captured by NetStock. And then the last thing I'll show on this screen is what we call our projection tab, where I can see, here's my ideal world, right? Based on product comes in, it depletes over time, the next replenishment arrives just in time, deplete over time, etc. And so here I am keeping myself within my min and max bands, and that middle bar is my ideal model, which we referenced on the dashboard. And now I can actually look at this in terms of an order screen, and I can dump this out to a spreadsheet and send it to my supplier and say, hey, ABC Supply, this is what I'm expecting to buy and when I'm going to buy it and what quantities for the next year. Make sure that you're ready for my orders, right? Ramp up your production process or your buying processes to make sure that you can meet my demand when I need to place orders with you and not put me on back order. So incredible availability of this raw data that now is actionable information that says, here's a view of what my future looks like if I can keep myself within these min and max ranges and so forth. So when we built the application, again, taking all that we'd learned from those decades of experience, we said, help me figure out how, as a small, medium-sized business, I can really make use of this tool. And the first question I need to answer is, what's out of whack, right? What's gone wrong in my inventory? And that's what the dashboard is all about, and the ability to drill into items on the dashboard that get bumped up here. So again, that management by exception, here's the most critical items. And as a buyer and planner, if I can only get to 3 or 4 or 10 of these items today, tomorrow I get a fresh dashboard with fresh top 5 list, and I work on those. And the next day, again, work on those with some discipline. And I can't help but see these trends go the right direction because I'm solving the biggest problems first. and those are having the biggest impact on my business. And so that answers that first question, right, of what's gone wrong, where do I need to pay special attention? The other question that we need to answer, though, is what do I need to order? So if I click on the orders tab off our menu, it takes me to an ordering environment, and NetStock immediately shows me a kind of summary view of every supplier that has at least one item that needs to be ordered today, right? Based on all the analysis and all the algorithms and math that we've done, here's every supplier that has at least one item, and it shows me exactly how many items for each of these suppliers need to be ordered, and some other statistical information about that. And then if I say, okay, I'm ready to place an order on this supplier, I click that radio button and say create order. And what the tool is doing for me now is really giving me what we call an order schedule, or in other words, a workspace where I can now, again, see at my fingertips everything that needs to be ordered for this supplier. So it blew out those 11 line items into individual lines with all the detailed analytics behind it. Here's the recommendation of what you need to buy, and here's why. Here's the cost of it. Here's how we classified it. Here's its current status. Here's a shorthand version of that policy panel. Here's my demand profile. I can look at other locations to see what's on hand. If I've got other warehouses, maybe I can do a transfer instead of a buy. All this information at my fingertips. As the buyer, I can accept that recommendation or change it. Let's say I override that recommendation to up to 3,000 because there's something I know that I want to get to that makes that better. As I've done that, I've got a summary table down here in the lower right that keeps track of any changes and additions or subtractions, so I can see exactly where I stand. If I need to add more items to get to a certain level of filling a container or a cost level to get a discount, I can either pick them off the list myself, or I can have some intelligence built into the NetStock app to help me solve for a certain target. So if we're tracking volumes, for example, I can do that, or get to a cost level to get free shipping or a discount, whatever it might be. I can pick those things off the list, or I can use the intelligence to do that, add that to my worksheet, right, to my order schedule. Now it says I've got 12 line items. And when I get it exactly the way I want, in a matter of minutes, I can have the optimal purchase order created. We talked about how critically important that is, right? I now have in minutes the ability to create that optimal purchase order, and then simply click download, and it'll go create an output file with that we then go create the open PO back in your ERP. In the case of Acumatica, we're using the REST APIs, and it's automatically creating that now as an open purchase order and going to follow the standard business rules within Acumatica. If there's approval processes or whatever those are, that's all fine. That all we're doing is saving you the data entry. We're giving you the analysis, making the recommendations, letting you make changes or additions to those, and then automatically go create the open PO. Just it's really a game changer. You probably hear the passion in my voice when I talk about it, because it, again, as a longtime member of the ERP community, years ago when I was doing implementations for my clients, I would have killed for a tool like this, and my customers would have as well. And it really does a great job. So I think with that, for our purposes today, obviously not a training session, but I wanted to give you a quick tour and give you a good overview of kind of where the application sits, how it looks, its ease of use and ease of navigation, and hopefully we've accomplished that goal for you. So with that, I think we're at about the end. Joel, I'll turn it back to you here in a second to see if we've got any questions that we need to address in the time that we've got remaining. Looks like we've got maybe 10 minutes or so left. But I just think NetStock really fits the theme of your series of webinars that you're talking about, the collaborate, innovate, accelerate. I already referenced how I think it really can accelerate the decision making. If you put proper buying processes in place, you can use a tool like this to really collaborate with your management team and with your sales teams to really do a proper sales and process planning, right? And what do I need to purchase to accommodate those? So there's just so much here in this application that I think fits nicely into the theme, and I hope you feel the same. So really appreciate you, Joel, and the team at Dynamic Tech creating this series and allowing us to be a part of it. I'm honored to be here. So thanks again, and I'll turn it back to you, Joel, for any questions.
Okay, terrific. Thank you, Russ. That was an excellent demonstration of the value of going beyond simple replenishment and into inventory analytics and what you can see in the power of NetStock. If everyone would just direct themselves to the question section on the panel and can input their questions, be happy to answer them. We do have a couple that are in the queue here, Russ. So
Okay.
while our attendees key in more questions, I will ask you these. What is the pricing model for NetStock?
Yeah, great question. It's a couple of components to it. One, there is two pieces. It is a one-time activation fee to get us through the entire onboarding process, to get you up and running, get that first connection and dashboard built, and go through the configuration process all the way to training you and getting you live on the application. So that's a one-time, what we call an activation fee. And then there is a monthly or an annual, you have the option, subscription fees or access to the service, right? It's software as a service, so there's a monthly or annual subscription fee. And both of those numbers, the activation and the subscription, will scale up or down based on the size of the inventory. So it's strictly based on how big is the inventory value that we're going to be managing in our application. If it's $1 million, that's one set of numbers. If it's 10 million, it's a higher set of numbers. If it's a $500,000, it's a lower number, right? So just to give you a ballpark, if we were at about, I think 5 million in inventory, runs about 6,000, I think, as a one-time activation, and maybe 600 a month. And so if you do that, some of that quick math that we did, you're going to be freeing up about $1 million worth of working capital, and probably $200,000 a year in cost savings. So pretty rapid ROI. But that's how the pricing model works.
Okay, great. How long does implementation take, and what is the process?
Yeah, another good question. As you can imagine, with all the implementations that we've done over the years, we're probably doing 25 or 30 a month right now as a kind of our current pace. We've got a very well-defined methodology for onboarding our customers. It's kind of a 5-step process that we walk you through. And I would say typical for a distribution company, I would say we're looking at 4 or 6 weeks, maybe 8 weeks on the outside. And so it's pretty quick. I mean, you're going to have a dashboard very quickly. The middle piece of our methodology is what we call the refinement phase, where we really look at tweaking the parameters and the classifications, maybe doing some custom grouping, thinking about how you think about inventory in your business, and what your supply chain looks like and so forth. So you'll quickly have a dashboard within a day, but then we spend some real good time working through that and making sure it's configured correctly. And then once we get it right, then we roll it out to other users. We'll typically work with 1 or 2 key people in the organization to get it configured. And then when we get that, then we roll it out through a training process with the others. So in a distribution environment, I would say 4 or 6 weeks, maybe on the outside 8. If you're doing manufacturing, maybe a little bit longer, more than 6 to 8 week range, but pretty quickly you're up and running and getting value.
Okay. Does someone need to come on site for the implementation?
No, we don't. We do this all remotely over the web with our coaching sessions and so forth. We have a lot of pre-built information. You may have noticed even in the on the screens when I was doing the demo, up in the top menu bar, there's something called Simon. That's actually our name for our integrated learning management system. So there's all kinds of video and text tutorial content available. There's context sensitive videos within the application. There's an online chat function that's always available for people in a support mode or while they're going through implementation. So we have figured out a way to not have to come on site, which is a huge cost savings, right? You're not paying big consulting fees for us to spend hours and traveling there and all those kinds of things. So it's all done remotely.
Okay, terrific. Can you explain more about the forecast and making adjustments, specifically with new items that maybe don't have a history?
Yeah, great question, because new items certainly are going to be challenging, right? Now, what we have found is that many times new items we expect, or the business expects them to behave similarly to an item that already exists and maybe has been discontinued and obsoleted. So we do have a function within NetStock that we call a super session that can utilize the history of a prior item and use that to project future demand of this new SKU. So that's one thing. So if that's available to us, if that makes sense, then that's a great tool. But other than that, we're just really going to be segregating those and guiding you to making manual forecasts, right? If you don't have an algorithmic forecast, you can still go in and put that manual forecast to get you started, and then keep close track of that. And of course, the algorithms start to get better over time, and we'll start to see that history. So there are some techniques, and our implementers can really talk you through that in more depth than I'm able to really help you understand how to manage new SKUs. It's an added challenge, but easily accomplished.
Okay, terrific. That wraps up our Q&A.
All right.
So if we could move to the next slide.
Mm-hmm.
So I'd like to thank everyone for attending our webinar today. Just a reminder to go out to our events page to check out some of our upcoming webinars. If you have questions about today's presentation, you need more information, want to learn more, reach out to me at joel.gress@dynamictsi.com. You can also reach out to Russ with your questions at russ@netstock.co. Feel free to go to the Dynamic Tech Services website, type in NetStock in the search, and you'll find some interesting blog articles as well as product information. All right, thank you all once again, and thank you, Russ, for a wonderful presentation, and we'll see you in our next webinar.
Thank you all very much. Have a great day.